And welcome back to another episode of the Total Sports Live podcast. This is Jovan. You already know who I'm joined by, my guys Harrison and Keaton, to break down everything fantasy football week 13, aka we are on the road to the playoffs in fantasy. 1 week, well, not technically, 1 week away, well, 2 weeks away until the fantasy playoffs begin in most leagues, as they will begin in week 15. So 2 weeks left in the regular season to make that final playoff push. We're going to break it down here all for you on this week's episode of the Total Sports Live podcast. However, before we do that, make sure you're following us on Twitter at Total Sports Live, checking out the website as well, totalsportslive.com. We have Seth's waiver wire report for week 13, which you need to be reading because he's been dropping some gems on some guys that we've highlighted on this pod that have kind of blown up, that he's written about, getting you prepared for the week. So make sure you be on the lookout for that. That is coming shortly out on the website. And make sure you're checking out the podcast as well on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, iHeartRadio, pretty much anywhere you can find the podcast. Make sure you follow us on there. Just search Total Sports Live TSL podcast. Appreciate everyone that tunes in on a weekly basis, that shares it, whatever you do at the podcast, download it, whatever you do. We appreciate you doing so and joining us for this ride. That's been an interesting year, not only in NFL, but in fantasy football. However, we took a hiatus for the Thanksgiving break. So I'm back with my guys, as always, to talk some fantasy. How are y'all doing? How was the Thanksgiving holiday for y'all? Got a nice break from the fantasy action, even though we were still setting lineups and all that good stuff. And now we come back to, all right, it's the playoff push now. This is where a lot of things will happen over these next 2 weeks, where teams will be in or teams will be out.
Yeah, had a good Thanksgiving. I ate a lot. My my fantasy team ate a lot as well too. I think two of the highest scoring weeks from some of my teams in the last couple of weeks. I don't know what's going on. So good stuff. All my teams are doing well, so I can't complain.
Yeah, likewise in terms of eating a lot of real food, but the fantasy teams not so much last week. I think I was under 100 in both leagues, so a little bit disappointing there. Not sure what happened on the Thanksgiving break, but like you said, Jovan, we're getting right down to it. It's the road to the playoffs. 2 more weeks, 2 important weeks. A lot of teams might need those wins, so let's give the people some advice to get them in the playoffs.
Yeah, definitely. I know for me, I'm hanging on to the playoff spots in some of these leagues. In Chris Shanafeld's league, I'm hanging on right now. I think I'm the third seed in the projected playoffs. So I'm holding on there. ESPN, I'm probably not going to make it 5-7. Not going to make it this year in the playoffs. Ran into some injuries on that side of the world, so not going to make it over there. In Harrison's league, definitely not going to make it at 4-8. Again, injury bug. When I tell you, looking at my roster, I have Irv Smith on IR, Khalil Herbert on IR, Rashard Bateman on IR,
Ouch,
Kyle Pitts on IR.
Ouch.
You had James Robinson shares.
Yep, I had James Robinson shares. DeAndre Swift was hurt as well. Romeo Dobbs also got hurt too. So yeah, it was horrible for me. But I'm hanging on.
Sometimes that's fantasy. Sometimes it's fantasy.
It happens.
I think you still have a shot in ESPN, by the way. Like, I think if you went out, right?
I mean,
get to something like 7-7.
7-7.
I just gotta just win the last 3, man.
7-7. I mean, it's possible. I would have to hope for the Mambas to lose out potentially, and then
I don't know. It's getting tough. It's getting
tough. It's gonna be a
wild.
The
cream is rising in ESPN this year. Usually, there's like a nice even distribution. You can still make it.
Hopefully, we'll see. I'm trying to make sure I can
sneak in there as the sixth seed.
I'm trying to see if I can hold on to my playoff spot in the TSL league. I'm trying to see if I can hold on, because that's a whole jumbled mess outside of Harrison's division, which is kind of actually really interesting.
We got some teams we got some teams. Myself,
9-3.
My
Keaton's
guy Corey.
8-4. Corey's 8-4. Daryl 7-5. Kyle 6-5. So yeah, it ain't over.
Some teams.
Yeah, it's going to be a wild week. in a wild finish to the regular season as we get prepped for the playoffs. But before we even talk about how people should manage, especially week 14, which is going to be very huge with a lot of teams on the bye week, like we're talking 6 teams, we're got to talk about a topic that you guys brought up, during, as we were getting ready for the show, and that was the disappearance of the RB2 this season in fantasy, which I thought was an interesting discussion that y'all brought up, and the way that y'all, talked about and discussed it. It made a lot of sense because I think a lot of us, when you come into fantasy, right, you try to get your RB1, you gear towards that, and you're like, all right, who's ever left in the later rounds, I can pick them up as an RB2. And again, we're going off of subjective rankings. We're going off our own personal rankings. You're thinking, if I take this RB1 on this team who projects as an RB2, he should be able to carry the weight and, kind of hold down my team. However, it hasn't worked out that way for a lot of us and for a lot of running backs who have come up short in terms of expectation that they just had, real life expectations and even fantasy expectations. They haven't, lived up to it. So I know you guys have a list of running backs that you came up with of guys that just did not come up big this year in fantasy. And really, I think it's caused a domino effect across the board. So who are just some of the running backs that you guys thought were going to be RB2s and then they just completely just disappeared off the face of the earth, like Thanos doing the snap?
Couple of names that come to mind for me, and ones that hit personally for me. I mean, DeAndre Swift for me is the first name that comes to my list. I drafted DeAndre Swift after 2 really promising seasons, even though they were kind of injury, involved. I guess I think the big expectation for DeAndre Swift is that you drafted him as a very, very high-end RB2, potentially a guy that could slot in and be a top 10 guy in the league every week. I mean, he's just that talented. He has the explosiveness, everything that you want. And then he ends up in this timeshare, this weird timeshare not Jamal Williams. I'm sorry, with with Jamal Williams. Yeah, I mean,
yes.
It's it was weird to see. We all knew that Jamal Williams, of course, great backup guy throughout his career, a great thunder and lightning maybe combo, but to really have Williams' involvement in this offense as deep as it was, to sort of shift Swift, if you will, back into that sort of maybe flex conversation within the conversation, instead of definitely starting him as an RB2, maybe even an RB1, was really damaging, I know, for a lot of folks that drafted DeAndre Swift with very important draft capital.
Very good point. What about you, Harrison? Who are just some of the running backs that you thought that, hey, these guys, if they're going to ball out as an RB2, but they have just completely dropped the ball. No pun intended for a running back. They dropped the ball.
I think looking at the RB2 running back position in fantasy as a whole, I think you're almost looking for running back 1A and running back 1B. You know what I mean? You're really looking for 2 running back 1s at this point. And we've mentioned it. Either you have an elite running back like a Dalvin Cook, a Christian McCaffrey, one of those guys, as your running back 1. After that, it just gets murky this year, though. You look at guys like Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Elijah Mitchell, A.J. Dillon, guys in that running back 2 range, even guys like Melvin Gordon with Denver early in the year, Chase Edmonds with Denver early in the year, guys that were drafted in that running back 2 range, that pick 70 to 100 range, trying to find a guy to solidify that running back 2 role. It just really hasn't been there for a lot of guys for a lot of different reasons. I think a part of it is just the way teams are using their running backs as a whole. This is a conversation we've had on this podcast before. Teams are going to more of a timeshare just naturally. It really doesn't matter who you have, what type of runner they are. There's not many 20, 30 carry guys in the NFL anymore. It's kind of an outlier. When it happens, you might get that 40-point performance from a running back, but it's just very much so less and less likely. And I think that's something we're going to see in fantasy moving forward, is just you're going to have to try to find creative ways to get that running back 2 production. It might have to be a pass-catching streamer guy one week who has a favorable matchup, or an Alexander Madison one week. If Dalvin Cook is out, you go on the waiver wire and get him, or you're stashing him and utilize him. I think that the running back 2 role as we know it, back in the day, I think it's just changed, and it's going to be something that as teams get ready for 2023 and their 2023 fantasy mock drafts, the running back 2 position is definitely going to be different than it was in years past.
I think just on the back of that, it's going to be important in future seasons when folks are drafting. If you want 2 really good running backs, you might have to go like super running back strategy and get 2 running backs with your first 2 picks or something, like that. If you really want to take on that strategy, because you can't wait until pick 50 or 60 or 70 anymore to get a top end RB2 that you can really rely on. There's really 10 to 12 of those guys in the league, and if you want 2 of them, that means you're probably going to have to dedicate a significant part of your draft strategy, to getting those guys in future seasons. But as for this season, as you said, we've been talking about it all year. The idea of a RB2 has been slowly disappearing, and it might get to the point, where the RB2 conversation starts to sound similar to the tight end conversation that we have after those top 3 guys. You're saying, well, we really need to pay attention to matchups. We really need to pay attention, to squeezing as much value out of this position as we can, because there's just not top tier guys that you can feel comfortable setting in your lineup and saying, I'm good with him. He'll certainly be, a boon at the position. So, I think it's getting to that point now, especially in this season, where you just have to get creative and figure out, what roles running backs are filling, where they could get touches and they could, eventually get some scores.
Yeah, most definitely. I agree with y'all, right? I think people are probably going to, like you say, either take the super running back strategy where you go heavy and try to land, a couple of the top 20, top 15 running backs early in the draft, and then kind of figure out, the rest of their, rest of the, spots from there. Or like you say, we even discussed this, off the air, you're probably going to be drafting for flex. There is no more RB2. You're thinking more of, this guy's a flex. He's just going to be a flex guy, for X amount of weeks. Usually we'll put a wide receiver in the flex. No, it's just going to be a running back in that flex spot, because you just can't depend on a lot of these guys. And, you mentioned, a guy like CEH, a guy that was supposed to come in and be that guy. He gets hit by the injury bug. But even before the injury bug, he wasn't producing, in that Kansas City offense, which has been very good this season, despite not having a Tyreek Hill. Elijah Mitchell, a guy that's honestly, it's not his fault, just been snake bitten by 2 knee injuries this season. Being out almost 2 months the first time, now again out for 2 more months. Season. Yeah, so you look at him, he's snake bitten. Everybody else is just, again, situation, right? Chase Edmonds, I know a lot of people, including myself, are very high on him. Especially the year that he had in Arizona, thinking, all right, he's going to go to Miami. They don't really have a clear-cut number 1 running back. Maybe he can kind of pop off there with Mike McDaniel, who's going to take the Niners, philosophy of running the ball, having multiple running backs. And he couldn't cut it there to the point where he got traded, on the trade deadline to Denver. But I think he got hurt, so he doesn't even see the light of day. So it's been a very tough and curious case about the RB2s, and we, even looking at the Rams running back room, that's just been a Rubik's cube of just who's going to start, who's going to play this week, because it looked like Cam Akers was going to play, then he was almost like he was out the door, and then Darrell Henderson comes in, and you're like, all right, maybe he can pick it up and do something. He doesn't. Then we see Ronnie Rivers get into action. You're like, who? You're like, who is Ronnie Rivers? Where did he come from? That was my first thing when I first saw him. I was like, who is this guy? Where did he come from? And then now we have Kyron Williams popping up into the picture, who they drafted, and it's like, oh, all right, now he's picturing it. So it's just been a lost year at the RB2 spot. No, so much at RB1, right? I think we all know, like, our RB1s are like straight. Like, whatever you get from them, you cool. From RB2's been kind of disappointing this year for the most part, and I think I think it's made fantasy harder just a tad bit in terms of lining the matches, but also something that we talked about too before the show. It made the trade deadline very hard to navigate this year between the stand-ins in a lot of leagues, and like you said, the dearth of not having a ton of quality running back options, where people probably would likely trade more running backs than wide receivers, or even use running backs as trade bait to get, a wide receiver. Haven't it hasn't worked out to that effect, and it didn't work out in a lot of leagues that we were in. Not a lot of trades, took place.
Yeah, I noticed trades were down across all the leagues that I play in. Maybe it's just I don't know if it's not a statistical thing. I'd have to probably look up, what the trade volume was in ESPN leagues this year or CBS leagues, whatever. But I think that that's a big part of it, that running backs oftentimes are the centerpiece of big trade deals. The blockbuster trade deals usually involve an RB1 or, at least someone that's like right within that range, that high end RB2 type of thing. So, considering that there aren't a dearth of guys that are right there by that line, that's what I consider to be, the biggest factor is, we don't have a lot of high end RB2s. We don't have a lot of RB2s at all, but, we don't have a lot of high end RB2s that people are willing to say, all right, look, I got a solid RB1. Maybe I have a flex guy that I like playing some weeks that maybe this RB2 could be used as a big trade piece to get me something, to reel in an even bigger fish as a part of a package deal. Or, I have 3 really good running backs and I really need some wide receivers. What can I do here? So with less of those options available at RB2, people aren't going to want to give up the only running back that can seemingly be productive on their team, which is probably their RB1, the guy that they drafted likely in the first round, or at least to be their RB1 in some way, shape, or form. You're not coming up off that guy with a dearth of options at RB2.
And I think really looking at it, like you said, running backs and receivers are what we see a lot of the big trades for. This year, it felt like the trades were really quarterback driven. It felt like teams were looking, maybe they had gotten 2 quarterbacks that they trusted. Maybe they drafted Trevor Lawrence and that worked out for them. Teams that drafted Brady, Rodgers, Stafford, Wilson, they had to make a pivot, try to figure something out midseason. Maybe they overpay for a Kyler Murray, a Lamar Jackson, and then you see some running backs and receivers moving there. But it felt like quarterbacks were really the piece that got moved this year. I feel like the past 2 or 3 years, maybe ever since the COVID year when it was really hard to kind of know who was playing each week and there was a lot of just roster, fluidity in general, fantasy trades have just kind of been down. It's been hard to find trades that make sense for both parties. It kind of feels like at all times someone is really the clear-cut winner in a trade and someone is just taking a loss, taking a flyer on someone, hoping something's going to work out. I think – ESPN has some cool stuff with the IBM Watson trade probabilities and stuff like that, but I don't really think it's worked. No offense.
I think it's done the opposite.
I know,
It's caused people to look at the numbers behind trades.
They're like,
instead
wait
of
a
saying,
minute, this doesn't make sense.
Yeah, like I just want to trade this guy for that guy.
Right, or when they even say like this team needs like X, like they need a tight end, they need a running back and a wide receiver, and it's like I can't give that up because I can't give them. I can't acquire that because I can't give them that because I need those things.
Yeah.
Who am I replacing,
Right.
Like
when everyone
has
the
Travis
data.
Kelce. Everyone wants Travis Kelce. People hit me up for Travis Kelce. Am I going to go to, Jelani Woods? Am I going to go to Hayden Hurst? Where am I going from Travis Kelce? And what am I getting in return? I'm going to need your best running back and your best receiver. And nobody's willing to part with that. So
of course,
I think, that's another thing. Like we talked about with the running backs, they could just kind of be fantasy ebbing and flowing and, kind of the evolution and changing times in fantasy. I think that there's less and less trades. We all said it pre-show. It feels like our leagues are more so waiver dependent now. It feels like, you have to be active on the waivers. That's where you're going to be making most of your moves, most of your acquisitions to improve your roster. I mean, I know for my 2 teams, I didn't get any trades done this year, but, every week there's somebody coming on the waivers. So I think that that's kind of where fantasy's going.
Yeah, because everybody's looking for that. Everybody's looking for that hot name, right? They're looking for the guy that just had the 5-catch, 100-yard game. He's like, oh, he might be somebody I could put in my flex, or the running back that comes out of nowhere and be like, he has an 80-yard game with a touchdown, and the back and the starter's hurt, and you're like, oh, he can be RB2 for the next couple of weeks. So this, like you said.
And data, I think, is helping in that aspect too, because we're finding out not just, oh, this guy's hurt this week, right? Or we're finding out this is this kind of grade fracture, and it's usually affects 26% of so we know so much about these injuries that we can say to ourselves, okay, DeAndre Swift is not starting this week. He's not starting the week after either, based upon what we know now about this injury. We've all turned into WebMD-ologists or something. So, we get these injury reports from several sources. Now it's not just the team doctors that are releasing media statements out to the general public and us making inferences from that. We've got people that are hired to not 24 hours a day, but every day it's their job to find out not just if a player is injured, but exactly how injured a player is. What's the impact going to be? We know strategies. We from asking these coaches a million questions whenever we can, right? So we know a lot about what's going to happen with the team. So it makes more sense to be able to pick up guys that maybe previously weren't valued too highly before in the offense, or didn't have a huge role in the offense, that could suddenly have a good role in that offense, and we know that a week ahead of time instead of after he has the 5-catch 133 and a touchdown game. That'll still happen, of course, but I think we're able to get out ahead of it a little bit more now, and it makes the value of waiver wire pickups shoot way up, instead of saying let me gouge the value on my team to gouge value on somebody else's team. It's a war of attrition when it comes to trades, when you can simply add to your team if you're smart enough about how you use the waivers.
Yep. That's the major key, and I think we're gonna, like you said, the RB2 position probably is going to start to fade away, especially as we get the next season, and we're going to be more knowledgeable, right? We're going to be more knowledgeable how these running backs are, who they are. If they move teams, we're going to kind of figure out, like, all right, this is how they're going to fit in with this team. We're going to be a little bit more knowledgeable how we approach, and I think, like you said, draft strategies are going to change this next season when we get ready for our fantasy drafts next summer. It's going to be interesting to see how people and managers kind of approach it. This is the Total Sports Live podcast here on Anchor. I'm Jovan, joined by my guys Harrison and Keaton, talking everything fantasy football in week 13. Fellas, we got to talk about week 14. I know we're talking about week 13, but we got to advance it and kind of predict week 14 here on the pod, as there's a lot of things that could be happening right now on this in week 14 of the pod. In week 14, there could be a lot of things happening as fantasy teams will be trying to figure out, can they make that final playoff push? This is going to be a final game in the regular season. They're trying to figure out, can I get into the playoffs? What do I need to do? Am I a game out? Am I a game ahead? A lot of like how they do it in real life, right? You're figuring out, all right, maybe I can sit a guy here because I don't need him, and maybe I can rest him. Like, no, you can't do that, especially in week 14, as there are going to be six teams on a bye week. This is almost reminiscent of what happened. I want to say that was week 10 or week 11, I think, where we had that massive. I know it was early this season where we had the massive 6 teams on a bye week and kind of threw everybody, through a loop. And we're seeing it again this time, as obviously there was no bye last week, so they had to try to fit in this last one here in week 14. And we have 6 teams on the bye. Like I said, the Packers, the Falcons, the Commanders, the Bears, the Colts, the Saints. Even though a lot of those teams aren't great, there are a lot of big name players that have helped fantasy managers this season, and that could help them make this last playoff push that will not be available to them, going forward. So, I mean, we're talking about Christian Watson, Aaron Jones, Alan Lazard, Cordero Patterson, Terry McLaurin, Brian Robinson, Cole Kmet, David Montgomery, Jonathan Taylor, Michael Pittman Jr., Paris Campbell, Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave, Jawan Johnson, and there's countless of others, that we haven't even listed that probably will be lower deep sleeper if you're in a 16-team league.
Maybe you've been eating off those random dart throws from these guys.
Right,
too.
you've been eating off, having Samari Torre or Cordero Hodge in your lineup when they scored a random touchdown. But no, these are the big name guys that are out. So, what do you think? How do you guys think managers, should handle their roster in week 14? And who are some, guys that they can pick up right now as waiver guys right now on the waiver wire that you can pick up now and say, I'm going to pick them up now. I might not start them this week, but they're definitely possibly going to be in my lineup for week 14.
Yeah, it's all about matchups. And that's what you have to look at here with replacements coming up in week 14. If you've got a roster spot, this is the strategy behind it. This being week 13, especially if you're a team that knows you're going to be in the playoffs, and maybe you have some flexibility with seeding over the next couple of weeks of where you could fall. But this is something that you might want to consider here. If you got a roster spot on the bench of a guy that you haven't been using a lot, or you've been saving that extra quarterback just in case, this might be a good opportunity to pick up some guys in week 14 for your team. So these are all guys that are going to be under 50%, right? Owned in leagues. That's what we're doing with all these guys under 50%. So, and Harrison, I hate to steal your guy here, but I think he has a great matchup here. Treylon Burks. I know you've been singing his praises all year, and it's well deserved.
He was right.
He's really coming.
He was right.
He's been right
about
right?
Treylon.
Like it's just one. There's also just to mention as a extra hat tip to you, Harrison, because there's certain guys, especially rookies, in the year that maybe the first 4 to 6 games or so, you don't really know what you get from them, and then they become league winners for you in the second half. We don't often talk about those guys enough. Treylon Burks seems to be within that category of catching fire at the right time, catching the kind of rhythm at the right time with the right guys. So coming down the stretch, wide receivers, you could always use him. He's got Jacksonville in week 14. That's a tremendous matchup. So I would say for sure him. Michael Gallup versus Houston in week 14 for Dallas. He's been coming into his own, still under 50% ownership, and you're facing just an absolutely demoralized Houston team. I mean, what do they have left there? But that's a really solid matchup. I think that you can really eat off of that as well if you need an extra wide receiver. Definitely a lot of other names on this list as well, but I love DPJ versus Cincinnati. Donovan Peoples-Jones. He's been hot. I don't know why. He's not owned in more leagues. But go ahead and pick him up if you haven't already. Got a matchup versus Cincinnati, which isn't great, but of course drawing attention towards the other side with Amari Cooper, as the wide receiver too, that he's going to do well. It's going to be a new quarterback, a new passing offense, if you will, in a sense. But we know that he's gotten a lot of production out of a very good quarterback in Brissett all year, and I expect nothing but upward progression there for DPJ throughout the end of the season. So not just this next week versus Cincinnati, but moving on as well.
Yeah, you're right. I don't know. I'm with you. I don't know how DPJ hasn't been picked up in a lot of leagues. Because like you said, outside of his game last week against the Buccaneers, he's been probably one of the more consistent wide receivers for a long stretch of time. Like he was a guaranteed lock for at least 4 catches in 50 receiving yards. I want to say 6 or 7 weeks straight. He was a lock for just getting it. Obviously, he didn't get it last week, but that should change and go back to the norm, coming up for the rest of the season with Deshaun Watson getting back under center for the Cleveland Browns. Harrison, what about you? Who are some players that people need to go pick up? And, like we said, you might not start them this week. You might, but week 14 is really the go time week, especially if you're competing for one of those last couple of playoff spots in your league.
Yeah, I mean, you could ask any teacher, anybody that knows me I've ever had. I'm a notorious procrastinator, okay? I'm always procrastinating things. But when it comes to fantasy football, for some reason, I like to get ahead of the curve a little bit. So I was looking at my week 14 lineup, and I noticed that I have 4 players on bye in the last week of the fantasy football regular season. And it's alarming to see almost. I don't remember that in the past being a thing. Back in the day, fantasy football leagues this late of buys in important weeks. Week 14, you could be 6 and 7 sitting on the edge in that final playoff spot. And if you have 4 of your starters out, it's a big deal. So you got to get on it this week. I think it's definitely something to try to get ahead of, try to look at some matchups. And we've been talking about Donovan Peoples-Jones all year. Like we said, don't really understand how he's not fantasy relevant, 70% plus, started in a lot of leagues, but that works out for you if he's still out there in your league. How about an even deeper sleeper? I promise he's open on your league. He's rostered in less than 1% of leagues. One of my favorite receivers in last year's draft class that just very surprisingly started to fall. Same team, Cleveland Browns, David Bell from Purdue. Not a lot of hype at all. Yeah, right. See? Not a lot of hype at all this year. Yeah. Back-to-back games with 5 catches, though. Just something to look at. Starting to garner some looks in that Cleveland Browns offense. Kind of their third guy, Amari Cooper and Donovan Peoples-Jones are solidified as their 1 and 2. We're talking about that Cincinnati matchup. David Bell started to catch my eye. I was really high on him in the draft process. Think that he's just a reliable pass catcher, a guy who gets open, and someone certainly, if we're talking about next year, 2023, I think late round all day on him. I think that he'll have a pretty legit role. And then two guys who are injured that, given the extra week as well, let them kind of get healthy. J.K. Dobbins, the Ravens running back, rostered in about 55% of leagues. So if we're doing the 50 thing, he's a little bit over, but check and see if he's out there in your league. Ravens running backs, it can kind of be hard to tell what they're going to do on a given week. Lamar Jackson's always going to be the best rushing option the Ravens have every week in the red zone, in the open field, no matter where it is. But at the end of the day, they're a run team. They like to run the ball. Getting the running game going, the traditional run game with their running backs is good for their offense overall. It's good for Lamar, good for just their, passing game, everything about it. So I like J.K. Dobbins. This is, a big stress for him. I think that if J.K. Dobbins doesn't really get it going in these last few games, the Ravens are probably on the running back market this offseason, looking to improve that position, maybe draft someone, sign someone. So that's interesting. And then how about Jameson Williams, the guy who hasn't played yet, all the talent in the world. We know what he has. That Lions offense hasn't been something that you need to shy away from this year. They've had some success. They've been able to throw the ball at certain times. They've been able to run the ball at certain times. I think Jameson Williams coming back will only be good for Jared Goff and that offense as a whole. And I think they'll look to get him the ball. I think that they're going to emphasize throwing him the ball more than maybe DJ Chark or Marvin Jones. I think they're going to try to get Jameson Williams involved, especially early. So those are just some guys right there. I would definitely try to get ahead of it, at least start looking, at least start thinking about some things, because if you're missing a lot of players and it's an important game, you want to be ahead of that.
You definitely want to be. And Jameson Williams is, I think, probably the most interesting guy along with David Bell, right? David Bell, a guy flew on the radar, but like you said, had a very, very productive career at Purdue University. Was Rondell Moore and David Bell. Like those were the two, stand out offensive weapons at that school. Like once Rondell left, it became the David Bell show. He was a catch machine. So again, a deeper sleeper guy. If there is no DPJ, if you can't, get a hands on Njoku at this point, which I'm pretty sure you can't, right? But if there's no DPJ, why not take a flyer out on David Bell? Because like you said, 5 catches in back-to-back games. That's noticeable, right? We're not talking about a one game, he had 5 in one game, then went back down to 2 the next game. No, 5 in back-to-back weeks. That's noticeable. That's eye-catching, especially when we go into week 14 where, you could be in a league. Let's say you could be in a league like ESPN where they go super heavy, on the waiver wire, and you're kind of stuck in a conundrum from taking David Bell or Nico Collins or Chris Moore from the Texans. You're probably going to take David Bell over a Texans wide receiver not named Brandon Cooks. So David Bell, I love that one. Even Jameson Williams, a guy who we think could potentially play sometime this season. And if you have him, and if you're so lucky you get into the playoffs and you have him as a weapon, that's a nice, insurance policy to have if you get to that point, if we see him. So 2 good rookie wide receivers. I love to mention there. And like you said, JK, if he can get healthy and just look like the guy that they seen last year, then not last year, the year before last, then he could give you some spark again as a flex, not RB2, as a flex in that Ravens running game, who you don't know who's going to start at a given time at running back. Gus, Kenyon Drake, Justice Hill, or J.K. Dobbins. So that's the Ravens running game for you. And for me, just a couple of guys that I spotlighted that are likely still available in a lot of leagues, lower tier guys at this point. You're probably thinking, why are we even highlighting some of these guys? But you never know. You might need them one of these days. Let's talk about, I was about to say Van Jefferson. We're going to wait for Van. Let's start with Mac Hollins. Hollins has started to come on. He's, for a Raiders team that is starting to show some life. They figured out their identity. They're showing some life. And Hollins has quietly been almost, he's not been DPJ-like in terms of stats, but he's been a very, solid wide receiver too in that offense that does not have, Darren Waller, that doesn't have, Hunter Renfrow. He's kind of stepped up and been very solid. And if you've had Mac Hollins in PPR leagues, you've been eating in the last, 6 games. He's had out of the last 6 games, 4 of them have been double digits. So, and he's only rostered in 15% of ESPN leagues right now. That's worth checking out, especially when you look at their matchup in week 13 against the Chargers defense, which has gotten better. But week 14 against the Rams secondary, that has not looked great at all this season. Kind of looked like a shell of themselves than what we saw last year with them. You got to think Jalen Ramsey obviously will match up one-on-one against Devontae Adams. But corner number 2 at the Rams, I can't even tell you who that is, right? Because it's not Darius Williams because he's not there no more. So there's going to be opportunities. Essentially, there's going to be opportunities for Mac Hollins to make some plays. So he could be a guy that steps in and makes some plays against that Rams secondary in week 14. So that's one guy to look out for. Another guy to look out for, and I've already mentioned him, so we might as well keep it going, and that is Van Jefferson. We told you about Van Jefferson a few weeks ago when we were telling you about Treylon Burks. That's why I got to listen to the podcast. We told you guys.
There you go.
Keep an eye on Van Jefferson. Get you some money. Van Jefferson, again, flew under the radar, mostly because he's been injured this season, rehabbing back from, knee injury, clean up a knee surgery, flew under the radar, but now he's kind of started to reemerge again as a playmaker for a Rams offense that we talked about before the show has just been stripped of all their offensive talent due to injury. Matthew Stafford's out. The running back room's in shambles. Cooper Kupp is out. Allen Robinson's done for the year, so somebody has to step up at wide receiver.
Somebody's got to catch it.
Not named Ben. Huh?
No, I said somebody. I just said somebody's got to catch it. Yeah.
Oh yeah, somebody has to catch it. Not named Ben Skoranek. Somebody not named Ben Skoranek or Tutu Atwell. We finally had a Tutu Atwell sighting a couple of weeks ago, which was so surprising. I was like, Tutu Atwell scored a touchdown? What? The guy they drafted in the second round? That's like 5'7", 150 pounds, soaking wet. Scored a touchdown, but nonetheless,
he's in the record books. You can't take that away from him, man.
You can't. You can, and maybe he'll score another one this season.
I hope so.
Because you said,
shout out to the little guys
one
out there, man. Yeah,
shout out to him. Finally living up to his moniker, being a second-round pick, I think. And Van Jefferson, a guy that was drafted in the 4th round a couple years ago, he's starting to show up and lately. And again, if you're having a PPR league, he's giving you 11.7 points and 11.9 points. Again, not a lot in the receiving department. He's only had 3 catches in his last 3 games. Like each game, he's had 3 catches. But 2 out of the 3 games, he scored a touchdown inside the red zone. Somehow, some way, Bryce Perkins is just finding his guy, Van Jefferson. And I think they could continue not only this week against the Seattle Seahawks, but I think against the Raiders as well. The Raiders secondary is not the greatest, right? Rock Ya-Sin, the Temple Owl stand out, and Amick Robertson are not the greatest of duos. They're solid, but as we saw what Tyler Lockett did to them last week, you can get them over the top and take them deep. And that's one thing we haven't seen Van Jefferson do a lot since coming back, going deep and scoring a touchdown. And I think the more Bryce Perkins is comfortable in that offense, we could see more of Van Jefferson. Shout out to Van Jefferson for also cashing my anytime touchdown play last week on the whim. Shout out to Van.
Love it.
We love to see that. But yeah, Van Jefferson, another guy who should pick up rostered in 22% of leagues on ESPN. Again, worth a flyer, especially when we're talking about week 14 and the numerous of guys that could be out. You can do worse than Van Jefferson at this point in a Rams offense that, again, like we said, they need somebody to score. They need somebody to catch passes. They can't throw the ball to themselves. They can throw it to the team, but they gotta go out there and catch it. Somebody does.
And it's not gonna be Odell. So
no, not gonna be Odell. Well, we'll see if even Odell plays this year.
We will see.
They're really taking this down to the wire.
Is he on the week 14 waiver wire list?
Maybe.
Borderline.
Depends on where he goes. I think if you have an open roster slot, I'm just trying to think. You would have to really need some upside.
Yeah.
On your team. So that's the only situation that I can see taking a flyer on him. Like you're getting absolutely no production out of maybe a third wide receiver that you have that you sometimes slot into the flex. So you're willing to experiment there. Like that's right. Like situation. And if you're in that position, I can't imagine that you're in the playoff race or or anywhere close. If you're thinking there's a third wide receiver on my team that I could interchange with a guy that hasn't played football all year long.
I was just going to say it's going to take him a few weeks to get back. Probably that seems like it's a week 16, 17 playoff type of thing for a team.
Right. Yeah. And if you're in the championship round, are you really going to consider starting Odell as the flex?
Right. That's what I'm saying. I mean, if you're in that situation, I just don't see those two scenarios lining up.
But it's a good question, though. It's a good question because I think people are going to think about it. They're going to think about it.
He's going to get
brought up. They're going to be tempted because it's a big name. Yeah, absolutely.
He's going to get brought up, especially if he signs with a favorable team,
Mm-hmm. Now, if we're talking Odell and DFS, that's a whole different story. You can take out a flyer on Odell and DFS because you probably got like 3 different lineups that you're playing. So, hey, it's okay to take the flyer.
Throw him in one, right?
Right. In week 16, 17, in the championship round in the fantasy football playoffs, we here at the Total Sports Live podcast do not advise you.
Do not endorse the
I wouldn't. Right.
We don't want you to take that L like that.
Not like that. That's not the way to go out. No, that's definitely not the way to go
out. Definitely not the way to go out there. A couple more names on the list before we move on to our final segment of the night. Quez Watkins, another guy to pick up. He's starting to really come on late for the Eagles, especially as they're still without Dallas Goedert. They're going up against the Giants for Week 14. Giants secondary is solid, but very beatable in a lot of aspects. No Adoree Jackson, so they're down there. It's their best. I think their best starting corner right now is Darnay Holmes right now, which you can, take advantage of him in certain situations. Whenever you get the matchup, and Quez is, like you said, Quez is starting to make plays, more so scoring touchdowns on this team, and that's what they need, especially when defenses are going to try to take away, AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. It's nice to have a third option in Quez who can, find his way into the end zone. Not so much, taking the top off, but just inside the red zone being that threat for the Eagles. So Quez Watkins is another one. And then the last one, super deep sleeper, because especially there's going to be some quarterbacks out there that you might have rostered, like Aaron Rodgers or a Taylor Heineke, who's kind of brought back the Commanders from whatever drudge they were in. Or Andy Dalton, if you was really starting him, God bless. If he was. Or Marcus Mariota, our guy, if you were still starting him, good luck. Bryce Perkins, this is like super deep sleeper. You have nothing. You have no other options. You're scared about what you might. You're cooked, basically. You're in a spot where
cooked.
You're absolutely cooked. I mean, you need something good to happen for you. You might have to take a shot on on him just because of, again, he's in a spot where he might be the starter for the rest of the year, depending on what happens with Matthew Stafford. Matthew Stafford isn't playing in week 13. We don't know if and when he's going to return, and the Rams aren't going to take a chance on bringing him back if he's not ready to. They're not in playoff contention, so you might see more Bryce Perkins. Perkins did a little bit last week. I think he had 100 passing yards, which is an upgrade from the previous week. He's slowly getting there to slowly, work him in the offense. Had a touchdown pass, did a little bit on the ground with his mobility, which you love to see, especially as fantasy managers. Anytime you get that dual threat quarterback that can move around on the ground, shout out to those that had Jalen Hurts in fantasy last week. You ate off just because of this very reason. When you have the dual threats, they give you points on the ground. You gives you a little bit more wiggle room. Perkins, hopefully we see a little bit more this week against the Seahawks, and then maybe in week 14 he really takes off. So this is more of a dart throw type of play. Like, you got no other options. Like, say if you had Rodgers and Heineke on your roster, like you have no other options type situation, or a Dalton, and this is like your dart throw.
You got Perkins or Mariota on the board right now for your starting for your team this weekend, Joe. Who do you got?
Oh God. Oh man.
Upside of Perkins, what we know about Mariota, like if that was like your choice, the top two. I mean, you have Mariota on the wire, you have Perkins on the wire. You're only grabbing one of them, right?
I'll jump in and say matchup wise, I like Perkins more. I like Perkins matchup more than Mariota versus the Steelers.
I do too, and that's exactly what I was drawing out of that. Like Mariota sometimes seems like a tempting pick because another dart throw kind of guy that sometimes produces high numbers, but quarterbacks that primarily use their legs to sort of shake up that chaos or to cause chaos to that defense. Again, it's already chaotic. It's the Steelers defense,
Right.
so probably not going to do well against that. We had a pre-show discussion about Lamar and that concept too.
Steelers defense this week. I forgot who they play in week 14. Who the Falcons playing?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure about 15. But just if you're looking for value in the next couple of weeks moving forward in your waivers and in your quarterback with your quarterback.
Oh yeah, Falcons are off in week 14.
And 14.
That's right. Yeah,
that's right. Algiers off too. But if you're looking for that value, it doesn't sound crazy when we're talking about Perkins and a guy that's coming off the bench that's been waiting probably for a long time to have a chance to prove himself as well.
Been in that offense too for a couple of years.
Yeah, that's what I mean. And just a guy that's probably pretty excited at the opportunity, and not a guy that's taking this as, oh well, here's all the backups, and I'm playing with a depleted roster and stuff like that. I'm sure this is the opportunity of a lifetime for Perkins. So talk about putting it all out there, and a guy that's going to be playing hard over the next couple of weeks. It's not totally crazy.
It's not totally crazy, and again, especially and I keep on bringing up DFS again. A guy in DFS who you can probably get super cheap on your lineup, and literally it's crazy. You could literally go cheap with Perkins and then go super stack heavy at running back and wide receiver with all the top plays, and hopefully you get something out of them. So Perkins is another guy to keep out for. And I forgot this last guy. I didn't write him down, but I was thought about it as we were talking about Bryce Perkins. Here's another interesting dart throw, and I'm gonna get you guys' thoughts on this. Mac Jones, week 14 against the Arizona Cardinals. Do you start Mac in week 14 against a Cardinals defense that's been a little shaky, and a Patriots team that probably will have something to play for in week 14, and they have some weapons, right? They have some wide receivers, they have a tight end, they have a running back in Ramondre Stevenson, and we saw Mac air it out really well against the Vikings defense, which isn't great. Air it out for 382 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. Is Mac worth a shot in week 14 if you need somebody?
I'm not going to lie to you. I think if you had said, is Bailey Zappi worth a shot in week 14, I might have said, yeah. But Mac Jones, I don't know, man. I still get some pause.
Michael McCorkle.
I still get some pause. He did look good on Thanksgiving. He had a nice night against the Vikings defense, but I don't know. The Vikings defense still doesn't scare me that much. The Vikings as a whole don't scare me that much. I know they have a good record, yada, 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 but all that aside, I don't know. I still get some pause about Mac Jones. If we're bringing up random quarterbacks, I mean, Mike White, he plays Buffalo in week 14, but Mike White had an exciting outing. Are you watching him this week, seeing what he does? Do you roll the dice against a good defense? Is Mike White a fantasy relevant quarterback at some point?
Potentially.
I'm telling you, I'm out of the Mac Jones business, by the way. Just no.
No parts.
No parts. That's my analysis on whether or not you should pick up Mac Jones for week 14. I just can't. I just can't. I just
yeah, it's hard.
Can't.
It's hard. Same
and
way.
I think
Same
a part
thing
of
for me. I can't do it.
Yeah, I think a part of it is Belichick's trust in Mac Jones to be the guy that wins the Patriots the game at the end of the day. I don't think it's quite there yet. And I'm not saying that Mac Jones doesn't have that ability or that he's not a pretty accurate and pretty careful short thrower, things like that. But I don't. This is still Belichick's team, so what he says, I think his intentions for the team will ring loudest for that quarterback. And in this particular case, I just don't have a lot of trust that he's going to put the keys in the hands of Mac Jones. So I'm out of the Mac Jones business. And that I just think there's a ton of guys that have more upside.
Yeah.
Now you said Mike White. Mike White against Buffalo is tough. Mike White in a general week, though, I think you like the upside that you get out of a Jets team that is looking to rally around someone other than Z Wilson in this offense. They seem pretty excited about him, so I like it, but I just don't like that matchup.
Right.
And I think the discussions we're having, right, is going to be discussions people are going to be having in week 14 if they're competing for a playoff spot. Like, what do I do? Who do I sit? Because there isn't going to be, I can afford to sit this guy because I still got next week, right? It's going to be, people are going to really be making these tough decisions, like going back and forth until kickoff. Like, I don't really know what to do.
Very difficult decisions in a very important week. It's crazy. There's a lot of buys in a very important fantasy week.
Try not to stress yourselves too much.
Yeah, for real.
Yeah.
It's just a game.
Yeah, don't
it's
stress.
just a game.
It's only a game,
Exactly.
Just a little app you play on your phone. It's not that deep. Don't pull a Tommy Pham, all right? We don't want to see any Tommy Pham situations.
None of that.
You know what I mean? Let's keep the friendships intact. Don't go ruining friendships over fantasy football, all right? I've seen it happen.
Please
don't do it.
Yeah, it ain't worth it, Justin. Just have fun and enjoy it. So we got one more segment here. You already know how we end each and every podcast off. It's a tradition like any other here on the podcast, and that is the anytime touchdown picks that we've been bringing y'all. Like we've said, we have been giving you guys. Yes, we have. We have been giving you guys winners on a very consistent basis. You know, we've been around that 500 area for a couple weeks, which is good. That means you're coming up. You know, you got some positive units in your bank account because some of the picks we've been giving you have been some long shots and some guys who've kind of been guaranteed. Like, all right, yeah, we knew this guy was, you know, going to score. And if you look back at week 11, and see who we have in week 11, we had Tyler Boyd, Justin Fields, Adam Thielen, Najee Harris, Alan Lazard, Cordero Patterson. I'm trying to remember who scored.
I was a week off on Adam Thielen. I was a week off.
You was. And that's how it usually happens,
Boyd
right?
I said I had a Thielen. It was just a little early. That's all.
The Thielen was correct. It was just the wrong week. Yeah, right. Tyler Boyd didn't cash in on the homecoming. I felt good about that one.
Yeah.
Justin Fields did. Fields scored on the homecoming. That was his last
start before the injury.
Yep. Najee Harris scored, right?
Yeah,
he did. Told you.
Lazard.
We had some other ones.
I don't think Lazard scored.
Did he remember?
No.
We got to go back.
Cordero scored. Cordero scored and Lamar scored. That's what the last two ones were. Because we went 4-3.
Yeah, no Lazard.
Still a winning record.
Yes. Very positive. Very positive.
Still won you more burritos than you lost. So
let's go.
Exactly.
Let's keep it rolling. Another week. Let's do another week.
That's the goal. The goal is to get you some burrito money. Or that Wawa Sizzling money. Whichever way you want to categorize it. We're just trying to
still got the gobbler right now? Is that still going on?
I hope not.
Nobody seems to like that thing. I thought it wasn't bad. I don't know.
No, it's just Wawa. It's just Wawa in there. Wawa food quality has diminished very quickly.
Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah.
It's not as great as it used to be.
That's a whole nother podcast.
It is a whole nother podcast.
You can get into that.
Tell me about it. But let's talk about these anytime touchdown plays. We got 6 for you, and obviously we'll add another one as we always do with our nice graphic that comes out every week on the Twitter account. So
it's a fantastic graphic, by the way.
Shout out to Jovan.
Shout out to our production team, which is Jovan.
Literally, our graphic designer.
He's a team of one who works hard.
Let's set up the graphic design team,
there, man. So yeah, go show him some love right now on the Twitter scope.
It's more so Canva. Shout out to Canva for making life hard, making life easy.
Right.
Helping make things happen.
We couldn't do it without y'all.
For the people that don't know how to do graphic design.
There you go.
Canva.
Harrison,
like graphic design
you got to go first. Harrison, you gotta go first, man. When I go first, it's bad luck for my picks.
All right, well,
you go first, man. I'm superstitious now. That's what this podcast has created in me. Superstition about who goes first in the anytime touchdowns.
Let's put in the order. No bowl. We're getting a burrito, some rice, some black beans now. All right, so
load it up.
Let's start it out. I was kind of between the two running backs here. This is kind of the theme of the show. Running back rooms as a whole. At first, I was liking Aaron Jones. We kind of got on here and discussed it. A.J. Dillon has a lot of vulture opportunities, and the reason I like Green Bay running back this week, I think they're going to look to involve the run game against the Bears, no matter really who's at quarterback. If Rodgers is out there, he's going to be playing with some type of injury, pain, whatever you want to call it. I think there'll be more runs. If Jordan Love gets the start, his first start of the year, obviously they're going to look to run the ball, try to make things more easy on Jordan Love so that the pass game can open up from there. I think either way, the run game is going to be prominent for Green Bay. These two guys, A.J. Dillon's had, speaking of the diminishing running back two, the disappearance of running back two, A.J. Dillon's had 2 weeks with double-digit fantasy points this year. He hasn't been a running back two, and you probably drafted him to be a running back two. There's a lot of upside last year. They used them in different ways, but it hasn't been Aaron Jones getting the ball 25 times a game. There's still touches for A.J. Dillon. He's a part of that offense. I think that his odds will be better than Aaron Jones's as well. So A.J. Dillon intrigues me. And then looking at a receiver, Christian Kirk for Jacksonville has quietly had some multiple touchdown games. 2 out of the last 3 games, he's caught touchdowns. Last week, he didn't. I think versus Detroit, a favorable matchup, they could get that going. Trevor Lawrence really took a lot of – last week was a breakout game for Trevor Lawrence. There was a lot of great throws against that Ravens defense, an outstanding 2-minute drill drive late in the fourth quarter where he looked like the Clemson and number 1 recruit Trevor Lawrence that everybody was really excited about. So I could see them kind of carrying that over, continuing that this week against Detroit. And I think Christian Kirk is an interesting play. Just a quick one here. We were talking about Mike White a few minutes ago. How about Garrett Wilson versus Minnesota? Saw an interesting stat. Garrett Wilson had 2 touchdowns in one game with Joe Flacco, 2 touchdowns last week with Mike Wilson. So that's 4 on the year, 0 touchdowns in the 7 games that Zach Wilson started. Just kind of looking at that situation as a whole. What does that tell you? I think that Minnesota is a favorable defense to go against and that Mike White could be looking Garrett Wilson's way. So that's just another quick one. Caught my eye.
Ooh, I like that. Garrett Wilson.
I like that Garrett Wilson pick. That's a really good one. It's a really good one. I'm going to go with, for my 2, I'm going to keep it in the AFC North here. But surprisingly, not with my Steelers. I'm going to go with David Njoku, who I think is just one of the best values running right now. The tight end position, as you know, is the tight end position. It is what it is. David Njoku has been very productive this year. He had an amazing catch last week. Who was that, against Tampa? That he had that catch?
Yes.
Yep. In the back of the end zone, 5 receptions on 7 targets last week. He was coming back from injury last week and playing a very tough Buffalo team. But other than that, his last 4 or 5 games that he's been healthy and that he's been playing, Njoku has been playing at a very, very high level. So at Houston next week, this upcoming week rather, I really like that matchup. So give me some Njoku to score a touchdown this week. Also, how about Lamar Jackson on the ground? Can we get some Lamar Jackson action? He's had quietly a pretty consistent and productive year, dare I say, on the ground this year. So I do think that he's the kind of player that you got to watch in a matchup where he might not get too many opportunities in the through the air. This could be a good matchup for him to get into the end zone. It's been a while. Give me some Lamar Jackson this week.
I like that. Lamar finding the end zone. They're going to need it because especially after the way they lost to the Jaguars, they need to come out and send a message, and they need to play. They need to show up, especially on offense and defensively. They definitely need to show up defensively. And what better way to do it against a very stout Broncos defense, which has been very good this year. It's just been the offense.
It's going to be tough to score. It's going to be tough to score against that Broncos defense. They have played well, as bad as the Broncos have played as a team. Looking at you, Russell Wilson.
Yes.
The defense has been tremendous this year. I think it's going to be tough to score when the level of difficulty rises. Usually, so does Lamar Jackson. And if I'm having any confidence in anyone in that offense to rise to the occasion of Denver's intense defense, that's who I'm putting my faith in.
I can dig it. I can totally dig it. You got my support there. Lamar Njoku, Dillon, Kirk, Garrett Wilson. And last but not least, rounding up with my picks, I'm going DK Metcalf, who I had to score a touchdown last week. I thought, this is a great spot against the Raiders defense that haven't been great against wide receivers. No, just went to Tyler Lockett, who scored his 3rd or 4th touchdown in a row. Which I can't blame him because I'm glad to see the Tyler Lockett resurgence, especially the way that the season started out from. Glad to see him pick it up because he low-key have probably – who he was probably like last couple of years in fantasy, probably been my favorite like wide receiver two in fantasy, just because it's like it's consistent. You know what you're gonna get from him, score a touchdown, he'll get you yards. So to see him resurge with Geno Smith, during the second half of the season has just been great. But I'm gonna go with DK. DK has been playing very good too. He just hasn't been able to find the end zone. He hasn't been lucky. Score a touchdown. He hasn't scored a touchdown in 2 weeks. However, that can and always will change as he got a ton of targets last week. We're talking 15 targets, 11 receptions for 90 yards. I love to see targets I love to see targets, and he's got a significant amount of them in the last 4 games. In the last 4 games, DK has been targeted 40 times. He has 2 touchdowns to his name. He hasn't scored one since week 9 against Arizona, but he's in a great spot to change that against the Rams defense, which we said no, it hasn't been great this year. It hasn't been great. He's going to get matchup against Jalen Ramsey, but Jalen Ramsey isn't the same Jalen Ramsey that we saw in Jacksonville. He's been kind of the totally different player, and with the Rams, especially this year, and the Rams have a team have given up 10 touchdowns this season to wide receivers. So they're pretty much due to give up one to this week. And, with all, especially how I look at it, especially with Tyler Lockett playing the way that he's playing over the last 4 weeks, they're going to try to make sure any possible way to let Tyler Lockett beat him deep. And they're going to try to keep, Kenneth Walker in check on the ground. So that leaves DK in the red zone. When he gets his 20-yard line, throw it up to DK. Let him do what he did. So I like DK to score a touchdown this weekend. And last one, he hasn't scored a touchdown this entire season. I was actually surprised that he has not scored a touchdown this season. I am amazed. I am shocked. I am flabbergasted. I thought it was blasphemous when I saw it. But Deontay Johnson scored a touchdown. I'm going Deontay. I have him in a couple of fantasy. I have him on one fantasy team.
Bold move.
I have to go there. Specifically just for a matchup. The Atlanta Falcons this season have given up 13 touchdowns to wide receivers this season. They've also given up the second most yards to wide receivers this year. They've given up the most receptions to wide receivers this year. Only the Steelers have been worse when we're talking about giving up touchdowns to wide receivers. Steelers have given up 15 touchdowns. So I gotta think Deontay finds a way in the end zone here, just because I think that if there is no Najee Harris, you look how this Falcons defense is. This could be prime territory where Mike Tomlin just airs it out with Kenny Pickett in this one. Pat Freiermuth, I think they're going to try to make sure Freiermuth's not a factor. And then, like I said, they're going to definitely be keyed in on George Pickens, who, has really shown up these last few weeks. And you can clearly see that there is a connection.
Yep.
That there's a connection between, those two young players. But we can't forget about Deontay. He hasn't scored this entire season. I think he breaks that streak here. Against the Falcons. In a game where Atlanta is on a game in where the Falcons are 1-point favorites, minus 115 on the money line. Honestly, it would not be so far-fetched to see the Steelers come out and actually win that game.
I was just going to say that. Yeah, I like the Steelers in that one.
Very, very winnable game.
Right.
Very winnable game, especially what they have on defense and going against a Falcons team that's really lackadaisical. I'm really surprised that the Steelers are actually 1-point underdogs here. I might have to smash that on the money line by the time when we get up on the show. So that's going to wrap up the podcast here. Thanks again, everybody, for tuning in to another great edition of the pod. Again, like I said, before we started, make sure you're following the podcast, on Twitter at Total Sports Live. Make sure you're checking out the website, totalsportslive.com. As we get Seth's weekly waiver wire report up, he's going to give you some guys that you need to spend your fab on. I don't know nothing about fab, but I trust him. He's a fancy expert. I don't get down with the fab, but he's been putting out some great stuff on the fantasy stuff, and good follow too if you look fancy with his stock up, stock down, reports, and giving his thoughts on who's the award winners in the NBA at certain points of the season. So make sure you give Seth a follow. I think his Twitter is SD Fisher. I'm not sure what it is, but I'll make sure to put it out there for you on the Total Sports Live Twitter account. But in addition to that, make sure you're following the podcast on all the various streaming platforms: Spotify, Anchor, Google Podcast, Apple Podcasts, pretty much wherever you get your podcast, you can find a Total Sports Live podcast there. Appreciate everyone that tuned in and been listening and following, supporting. We appreciate it. It means the world. Means the world to us. And yeah, make sure you follow all of us on Twitter at Jovan 10, at Harry Brown-Russo, at Keaton D Nichols, at Total Sports Live. I think that's it, fellas. I think
That's
we
all the
wrapped up
ads.
another. Yeah, I think we got everything wrapped up here on the pod this week.
Sounds good. Everybody take care. Have a great week. Win your week so you can get into the playoffs, guys. Come on.
Right. I think
Yeah,
so too,
literally.
man. We're coming down to it. Lock up those playoff spots. Go get the dub.
Try to win this week. Try to win this week so you're not in a win or go home situation in week 4.
Right.
I'm pretty sure I might be in one of those situations, but
at least one.
So be it. So be it. It's just going to make that so much fun to talk about next week when we're really in that situation.
Right.
So
pressure comes in.
There you go. So for everyone here on the pod, have a good one, and we will talk to you all next week. Looking forward to the pivotal week 14, the regular season finale. Tickets will be punched to the postseason while other people will be going home in very disappointing fashion. But we'll break it down all here on the podcast. Everyone have a good one. We'll talk to you all soon.